constraints that exist on the property and how we're going to deal with those. And then finally, I'll conclude my presentation by talking about the investment the city anticipates making into this property over the foreseeable future in order to reposition it, and the timeline associated with implementing all the actions that are necessary to overcome the issues on the property. Most importantly, we'll conclude the meeting with an opportunity for anybody that's on the call tonight or on the virtual meeting to ask questions. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And if somebody is interested in just providing comment that they would like to be shared with the City Council, we'll accept comments, and we can assure you that we will collect those and provide those to the City Council at an upcoming appropriate City Council meeting. So the first question that I'm most often asked about this property is, why in the heck is the city involved with a rundown, contaminated gas station property? And really, from my perspective, as I thought through that and responded to that question numerous occasions, there's really 5 main reasons why I think this is the case. And they're all somewhat intertwined with each other. I think most people would agree in the community that this particular property is a very prominent property. It's located at the intersection of Warrenville and Batavia Road. That's historically part of the historic area of the community. It's the area of the community that was first settled in 1833. It plays a very prominent role in how that area of the community looks and feels. And unfortunately, since the property was built originally, there's been very little private investment into maintaining and or upgrading the property. It seems as if year over year over year, the property slowly but surely deteriorated further, and the lack of investment into the property became more apparent. The current condition of the property, both above ground and underground, is complex and not in good condition. The existing building improvements on the property have asbestos in them. They've fallen into such a state of disrepair and age that they're really functionally obsolete, not really something that makes sense for anybody to try to rehabilitate and reuse in their current condition. From a surface or a property site standpoint, a big part of the property is located within the 100-year floodplain of the DuPage River, and therefore has quite a bit of restrictions on how it could be used. That includes the area of the property where the existing convenience store is currently located. So that store was built before the floodplain maps were issued back in the 70s, and it would not be able to be rebuilt in that same location. And there are very strict limitations on the amount of investment somebody could make into a building that's already in the floodplain and not properly protected, which that building's not. Subsurfacely on the property, there's a series of kind of intertwined and overlapping contaminants on the property. There are remnant petroleum contaminants on the property from a variety of leaking underground storage tank incidents that existed or that were reported on the property over the last 20-some years. There's heavy metal contamination, both in the soils under the property and in the groundwater underneath the property. These existing conditions and constraints on the property really make it so that the property is not really attractive private sector redevelopment reuse standpoint. The reality of it is all these constraints and issues that exist on the property are somewhat counterproductive. They are going to be costly to address, as I'll talk through this presentation. And there is always uncertainty when you're trying to deal with subsurface contamination. At the end of the day, once the contamination issues are dealt with on the property, because of the floodplain, there's a relatively limited amount of property that could be reused for private use. And for those reasons, it hasn't made sense, and I don't anticipate that anytime in the near future it would make sense for the private sector to take the lead on dealing with all these issues and independent of the city repositioning these property for reuse. Fortunately, the city does have access to quite a bit of alternative funding sources and funding assistance that the private sector does not have access to, that can be used to help offset some of the extraordinary costs that would be incurred to deal with the contamination on this particular property. So that's another benefit, and another reason why the city felt that it was imperative to get involved in this case. And then last but not least, I think it's definitely worth noting that the city has successfully assembled and facilitated the cleanup and redevelopment of a very complex brownfield site, not a gas station site like this, but a contaminated industrial site located back behind City Hall in the Library District. The city spent an enormous amount of time, energy, and money facilitating the cleanup and redevelopment of the former Musselman property to what now exists today. And I think most people in the community would agree that what's there today is far more appropriate given the context of the area and where the city of Warrenville is today. But through that process, the city gained an enormous amount of experience and knowledge in how to navigate all the different entities that are involved with trying to facilitate that type of cleanup and redevelopment of brownfield site, and all that information and institutional knowledge now can be used and deployed to deal with the property there at the corner of Batavia and Warrenville Road. The city goals for the property, first and foremost, I think one of the most pressing goal is to eliminate blight on the property. The existing closed down gas station is in terrible condition. As I mentioned earlier, it's functionally obsolete. It doesn't make sense for anybody to invest any dollars into trying to rehabilitate, reuse those existing improvements. So they continue to just further fall in a more state of disrepair than what they are today. So the goal would be to get to a point where we can take down those improvements and then move into the process of remediating all the contamination that exists on the property and preparing the site for desirable private and public mixed-use redevelopment. From a public standpoint, the goal would be to convert a large portion of the floodplain on the property into a new public open space amenity for the community. The city already owns the couple parcels to the north of this property, which also have a significant amount of floodplain on them. And the goal would be to assemble or combine the floodplain portions into a new public open space amenity. The exact details of that is yet to be defined through a variety of work and processes that have not yet been undertaken. The outside perimeter of the property, which is for the most part located outside of the 100-year floodplain, would most likely be redeveloped in a mixed-use format, a mix of commercial, office, and potentially second-story residential units, similar to like the Bear Building across the street. Again, the details of that have been not fully defined. The city will be working through a process to more clearly define how that property would be best redeveloped in the very near-term future. On the right side of the screen, you'll see a kind of a soft line concept plan that was prepared as part of or during the city's due diligence process when we were working through the decision process to determine whether we're going to purchase the property. We prepared that to give an understanding of how the property could potentially be redeveloped, and based on how it could be redeveloped, what type of cleanup activities we would need to undertake in order to support that type of redevelopment. When it's all said and done, the ultimate goal is to reposition this property so that it could be reused and redeveloped in a manner that would enhance both the economic and social character of the community, and hopefully, hopefully make that entire area of our community more attractive for additional desirable private investment. At this point in time, I've talked to enough developers, business owners, real estate folks, property owners to know it's pretty clear that the existing gas station is clearly a detriment, a deterrent to private investment in that area of our community. So what have we been doing for the past couple of years, and most currently on this property? As part of the city's process to purchase the property, we spent a couple of years doing a whole lot of due diligence on the property, due diligence investigation, working with Terracon. They performed collected a lot of soil and groundwater samples on the property, analyzed those samples. We've had ongoing and extensive conversations with different elements of the Illinois EPA to understand how we can move forward and what we would need to do to clean the property in a manner that would support the type of redevelopment I just spoke of. Ultimately, all that due diligence work culminated last spring or last summer when the city ended up purchasing the property. I think it was we closed on the property last July. Shortly after closing on the property, we moved forward with the process of developing a project plan and bid package to remove the remaining underground storage tanks on the property and the existing gas pump, equipment on the property. We coordinated with the Illinois EPA to get all those plans approved, went out to bid, hired a contractor, and late last year and early this year, that contractor completed the removal of all the remaining underground storage tanks and gas pump equipment on the property. So as of today, it's our belief that there are no more underground gas tanks on this particular property. Again, throughout this entire process, I can't overemphasize how much coordination and communication we've had with different elements of the state of Illinois that have some role in what we've already accomplished on the property or will be attempting to accomplish on the property, including the Office of State Fire Marshal, the Illinois EPA leaking underground storage tank program, the site remediation program, and most importantly, in the short term, the Office of Brownfields Assistance. And I'll talk a little more about that shortly here. So from a next step standpoint, it is our goal to move forward with remediating or abating the asbestos and hazardous building material that are found in the existing buildings on the site. The photo on the screen is a picture of the interior area and condition of the former convenience store building. There's a variety of different, it's in terrible condition because of roof problems, but there's a variety of building materials throughout that entire building that have asbestos materials, asbestos component to them that we would have to remediate before we move forward with the demolition or in conjunction with demolition of the structure. So our plan is to move forward, design a bid package, bid it out, hire a contractor, and we'll complete the remediation of the asbestos hazardous material so we can take down the convenience store building, the gasoline pump canopy, and the former kiosk building on the center of the property. At this point in time, we're estimating the total cost of that work will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $88,000, based on the outside funding commitments we've already received, and we are in the process of securing at this point in time. We're estimating that the city's share of those costs will be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $50,000. It is our hope and plan that we can be in a position to complete this asbestos remediation building demolition work later this summer or early fall of this year. we complete that, the next phase of work that we're going to concentrate on is dealing with the remaining petroleum contamination that exists on the property. Again, this contamination stems from multiple leaking underground storage tanks and incidents that occurred or reported on the property over the last 25 plus years. Based on the extensive amount of investigation we've done on the property, we have a very good understanding of the scope and scale of that contamination and what it's going to take in order for us to deal with that, properly deal with that petroleum contamination. We anticipate or estimate that the total cost to deal with that contamination will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $470,000. Fortunately, the state of Illinois has what's called a leaking underground storage tank program. So every time we all buy a gallon of gas, a few cents of the purchase price for each gallon goes into the leaking underground storage tank program and is available for owners of gas station sites to remediate contamination that was related to tanks that were registered on the property, which that's the case in this particular situation. So we'll be able to secure a whole lot of outside funding through that program for the various remediation costs that will incur to deal with the petroleum contamination on the property. We've also negotiated and received a $90,000 cash contribution from one of the previous owners of the property to help offset some of the city's share of the remediation costs. So when it's all said and done, we're projecting that the city's share of the remediation costs for the petroleum-based contamination will be around $44,000. And at this point in time, we're working towards trying to be in a position to do this work sometime later next spring or the summer of 2022. And then finally, last but not least, probably one of the more challenging issues to deal with on this particular property, and that's heavy metals that are found in the subsurface soils and in the groundwater under the site that are found at levels that exceed what today's IPA remediation standards call for. Most likely, these heavy metals are related to fill that was brought into this site to way back when you could fill in floodplain areas and nobody cared. Probably 40, 50, 60, 80 years ago maybe. And unfortunately, it seems as if based on our analysis that fill that was brought in had this heavy metal in it, these heavy metal levels in it, and it is now something that in order for us to reuse the property like I previously described, we're going to need to deal with that. That work would entail digging out and removing or covering up the contaminated soils so they're not accessible to the people that might visit the site, either the park or the businesses on the site. We're estimating right now that the cost to do that work is somewhere in the range of just over $400,000 to $550,000. This is one area that as we do the other work on the property, we will be able to more clearly define exactly what remaining work needs to be done to address the heavy metals on the property, because some of the petroleum-based contamination remediation work will by default also deal with some of the heavy metal, but until we finish that work, we won't know exactly what. So we're not able to more accurately define the ultimate cost. But again, we're estimating somewhere between $400,000 and $550,000. As I mentioned before, we have secured, in the process of securing additional outside funding assistance will help cover some of these costs. When it's all said and done, that's our expectation that the city's share of this remediation cost will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $238,000 to $383,000. The soonest that we could potentially be in a position to move forward with this work would be sometime next summer or fall of 2022. I would say spend the money and authorize the work to be done. Those discussions have yet to be had. We'll be had incrementally over the coming years. From an overall financial perspective, here's what we're looking at. We're estimating that the total cost to purchase, deal with all the contamination and hazardous building material issues on the property, demolish the structures, will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.1 to $1.25 million. Again, based on the outside funding commitments that we have secured and are in the process of nailing down, the city's share of those costs will be somewhere in the range of $482,000 to $627,000. A couple of notes on that is that we've already spent about $150,000 of that cost to do all the due diligence work that we did in order to understand the conditions of the property, the legal work to actually close on the property, the purchase cost of the property. There was several years of back property taxes that had to be paid. It's all part of the $50,000. The remaining city share is most likely going to be able to be covered by a no interest loan that we're working forward at this point in time to secure from the Illinois EPA's Office of Brownfield Assistance. Tentatively, they've earmarked like $690,000 to this particular property that we'll be able to tap into. We'll be talking more about that with the City Council at upcoming meetings. We're close to finalizing the intergovernmental agreement that would allow the city to tap into that no-interest loan. Under the no-interest loan, the city would be able to be reimbursed for most of its costs, and then we pay no interest but have to repay the loan over a 10 to 12 year period. So that brings me to the question and comment period. I would offer that, I want to point out that if anybody has any questions or comments after tonight's meeting that come to mind that you either want to get some information on or you want to provide that feedback, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information is on the screen there, and we're committed to doing our best to get you the information. And if you provide comments after tonight's meeting, we will document those comments, and as I mentioned earlier, we will share those comments with the City Council at the appropriate upcoming opportunity. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. No questions? All that information and no questions. I'm not that good. Not even close.
Ron, this is Mayor Dave Brummel. Thank you for a great presentation. As always, complete, informative, and I think you answered a lot of questions. Most people are concerned about the investment the community has to make and how we're going to augment that with outside sources. I went through that very well. You listed the sources of contamination over the years. You gave a good presentation on why the city needs to be involved in this operation, because if the city doesn't get involved, it's most likely going to be like this forever, because no one else in the private sector is going to take the chance to redevelop it because of the cost estimates being uncertain and the amount of the cost involved. The importance of the community emphasized that this is a place that has high prominence, that really when people come down the hill and they see that, that's their first impression of Warrenville. This is something we'd certainly like to change. We have an opportunity to improve along the riverfront there for open space, so this is a huge opportunity, I think, and you made a good point of that. I really appreciate the fact that everyone needs to understand that this will stay as it is or be downgraded over the years unless the community gets involved. And this is what communities do. When people say, well, you're spending my tax money on this, I have to I say, yeah, that's what we do. We spend tax money to make the community a better place. So A great presentation, I very much appreciate it. I hope this has been recorded and can be played back for folks later who weren't able to attend tonight. But as always, you did a great job in presenting what's going on, what our hopes are for the future, and what the costs involved are. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate the comments. All right, well, if there's, can't make people ask questions, does anybody have a comment that they would like us to share with the city council? All right. Well, I'm not going to belabor the point. I really do appreciate everybody that did take the time to join us this evening. This is a complex but very important initiative from the city's perspective. We do now own the building, or own the property, so to some extent, there's really no turning back at this point in time. We have some increased level of responsibility to move forward and do something on the property that's ultimately going to be hopefully a positive long-term outcome for the community that exists there today. So again, with that, I would like to thank you all for attending tonight, and feel free to give me a call or contact me via email if you have any follow-up questions or information needs regarding this site. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Christine.
Oh, thank you, Ron, so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you, Ron.
Christine.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Bye, Linda.
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.